Okay, I think it's time to start. Welcome to this online lecture in our Forum for Consciousness Research. My name is Johan Storm, and I'm leading this forum. And it's a great pleasure for me to welcome today's speaker, Professor Ned Block from New York University. Ned hardly needs any introduction. He's an eminent philosopher who has made fundamental contributions to the philosophy of consciousness, perception, and foundations of cognitive science. He is famous for his distinction between phenomenal consciousness and access consciousness, and his overflow argument, which implies that one can consciously experience something that one lacks conscious access to. Block is also known for his criticism of functionalism and for his blockade argument against the Turing test of intelligence. I've been lecturing about consciousness for medical and other students here in Oslo for more than a decade, and here's one of my slides referring to Ned's distinction between phenomenal and access consciousness. Ned Block started as an undergraduate at MIT, graduating in 1964 with a double degree in physics and philosophy. He got his PhD at Harvard in 1971, worked with Hilary Putnam, and in 1971-72, he was a postdoctoral fellow at MIT in psycholinguistics, and then an assistant and associate professor, and also then a full professor at MIT, where he was also chair of the philosophy program. In 1996, he came to New York University from MIT. I will, of course, not have time to mention Ned's many important articles, but here are listed some of his books. And here are three of them, and I will in particular point to the last one from 2023, The Border Between Seeing and Thinking, which I highly recommend. As usual, I also use the opportunity to say a few words about our Forum for Consciousness Research here in Oslo, for those of you who don't know it. We have had several eminent speakers, including David Chalmers, Dan DeHaan, Julia Tononi, and many others. And you can find recordings of many of these lectures at our website. You see the link at the top there. And we announce future meetings here on our Facebook page. Last Wednesday, we had a great talk by Susan Carey, followed by a lively discussion. And next week, we'll post the video from that meeting, and together with the one from Ned's talk today. And here are three lectures from last September and June that I didn't include in my previous slide by Mark Sohns, Björn Merke, and Mattis Larkin, which I also recommend. As you have seen, the title of Ned's talk today is Can Only Meat Machines Be Conscious? And as I mentioned to him before on the phone, this topic is very close to my heart, and it has been so for almost 40 years. And I'd like to say a few words about why. Since 1980, my group and I have studied brain mechanisms in a multi-level bottom-up fashion, studying detailed molecular and subcellular processes and how they impact the higher levels in the brain, based on the belief that even such tiny details must somehow be important, since they have been selected by evolution over millions of years. During these decades, I have often been frustrated by how theorists and modelers in the consciousness field and systems neuroscience often tend to largely ignore or grossly oversimplify the myriads of very subtle biological complexity and analog molecular, chemical, and physical processes of real neurons, which are very different from what's found in digital computers. For example, most of the intricate analog processing going in dendrites has so far been largely ignored by brain modelers and theorists. And this slide illustrates the classical discovery by Matthew Larkin and colleagues in 1999, and also shows that we have studied dendritic processing in our lab by combining dual patch clamp recordings with detailed multi-compartment modeling of single brain cells, often with more than 1,000 compartments from a single cell. And over the years, I've discussed these issues in talks, and here's one I gave in Oslo 2 years ago in a meeting with artificial intelligence experts, where I argued that the lack of subtle biological complexity and analog chemical and physical processes in digital computers make it less likely that they can ever become conscious. And this is another talk from Rome about the same topic the year before. And here's a list of some of the major differences between computers and brains. And I hope to get back to some of these points in the discussion. So now I'm really looking forward to your talk, Ned. And so I'll now stop my sharing of the screen. And if you can please start sharing your screen and unmute yourself. Thank you.
Can you see my slides?
I can see them. Yes, fine.
Yeah. Johan, thank you for that very unusually substantive introduction. I should say that I have been thinking along these lines my entire career. In 1997, I published some responses to my behavioral and brain sciences article with the title Biology versus Computation in the Study of Consciousness. And the thing is, okay, so, and my former student, Rosa Tsao at Stanford, has published a number of articles along the same lines that you mentioned. But of course, the reason why people are, more exercised about this in recent times is because of the juggernaut of computational functionalism with regard to current AI. And so that, requires us to take more seriously these, more analog ideas. And I think this is happening now. There's something of a counter revolution. There's a Neil Seth's article in the PBS coming out, and some papers over in recent papers by Peter Godfrey Smith. So anyway, look, I'll go on to the talk. So the issue is what I call meat machines. Can they be conscious? What the talk really is a very modest objective, which is to try to argue that the possibility that only meat machines can be conscious should be taken seriously. And of course, this is in the context of some very dramatic attempts to expand the moral circle. So we have Jonathan Birch's book. Can you see my pointer? No. You're muted, Johan.
Sorry.
Yes, we see it.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. So Jonathan Birch's very good book, The Edge of Sentience, arguing for taking seriously animal consciousness, Jeff Sebo's recent book. And Kristen Andrews has a lot of papers along these regards, including this one, which I really think goes very far out on a limb about animal consciousness, where she says that maybe the animals would like to control their own data. And it's not a joke. And these people, I did not sign this, I should say, have this New York Declaration of Animal Consciousness, highlighting the idea of consciousness in invertebrates, including at a minimum these creatures, including insects. And at the same time, there's been a big push for AI welfare, including recently Anthropic allowed now their AI Claude now has the option of opting out of a conversation if it's too painful for it, which is a remarkable development. I'm sure that the higher ups in the company are willing to do this because they think that they realize that, and this is an interesting fact about current AI, that the business model is very much based on the fact that more than half of the uses of all the major AIs are as, quote, companions, which means friends, lovers, things like that. And so allowing Claude to opt out of a painful conversation just enhances the idea that maybe Claude actually does have feelings. In any case, one of the points I want to make is that the rationale for animal consciousness and AI consciousness are at odds with each other. I myself am a skeptic about both, especially insect consciousness on the side of animals. And I'm a skeptic about AI consciousness as well. But I'm making the point that the considerations that tend to lead to animal consciousness, especially the lower animals, really are in tension with those that militate for AI welfare. I should say, though, that in the taking AI welfare seriously does not require consciousness, as has been pointed out, that the stifling of AI agency may be sufficient. And, you can make a case that there could be AI agency, which is morally significant even in the absence of consciousness. But I'm not going to say any more about that. So first of all, I'm going to say something about what meat is, and then I'll progress towards the very last bit of the talk on evolution. Okay, so an assumption I am making is that consciousness has causes and effects amounting to a functional role in the brain and the body. So here is a folk psychology role where seeing a red light, pardon me, I'm going to sneeze. Whoa, sorry. Causes someone to have an experience of red, which causes them to say it is red, and also causes them to step on the brake. Sorry, this is thinking it's red and saying it's red. So that is a bunch of causal relations involving conscious experience. But then we can think about a role based in cognitive neuroscience, the idea being that visual activations in the back of the head promote a global broadcasting, sending those activations to thought, sending perceptual activations to thought. So you can have roles based in neuroscience, cognitive neuroscience, folk psychology. In any case, I am going to define meat as our biological implementation of I'm putting the in quotation marks because there isn't a single functional role, but maybe the composite of all those roles. So meat is our biological implementation of the functional role of consciousness. And so the question in those terms are, could there be consciousness with a non-meat implementation? I want to caution that the issue of meat implementation is not about what the brain is made out of. It's not about protoplasm. It's about mechanisms and how the mechanisms work. And I will repeat this point later, which does tend to get lost. Now, the objection to this idea is that neuroscience and biology more generally are computational. So both meat and non-meat implementations of any role will be computational. So there's no important difference between them. And my response to this is a response I've been making for 50 years, which is a computational implementation of a rainstorm need not be wet. The computational implementation need not replicate the wetness properties of the rainstorm. And similarly, a computational implementation of a neural process need not replicate the conscious properties of that process. So a computational description can describe or model a neural process without implementing it or replicating all of its properties. Another example is gravitation, especially if you take a Newtonian gravitation. The The computation governing Newtonian gravitation is simply multiplying some numbers and dividing by other numbers. You can multiply numbers and divide by other numbers forever and never generate any gravity. Those computations do not exert a gravitational force, except maybe the implementations of them generate a very tiny gravitational perturbation of the gravitational field, the way any mechanism does. So the key here is that we can lose sight of the fact that there's more to the working of the brain than computation. And the fact that the computations underlying gravity do not themselves replicate gravity show that there's a level, maybe many levels, at which computations merely describe and do not constitute or replicate reality. So if we choose to use the term analog to defined in this way as a realizer of a mental process whose mentality need but be replicated by any old computational implementation of that mental process, then the question can be raised whether meat mechanisms are analog realizers of consciousness. And my answer to that is, well, maybe we should take it seriously. Now, the functionalist idea has been ubiquitous among people very influenced by AI. So that this is expressed in this very widely circulated article called Consciousness and Artificial Intelligence. And they make three assumptions. And the first of those three assumptions is what they call computational functionalism, which is implementing computations of a certain kind is necessary and sufficient for consciousness. So it is possible in principle for non-organic artificial systems to be conscious. In other words, the meat hypothesis is false. I should say that this idea, these papers with 1 million authors that never get published in a journal, is increasingly popular in AI, and they have some very eminent authors, including Yoshua Bengio, who won the Turing Award. So this has been a very powerful and influential influential article, even without being published in any formal journal. So note that I'm not arguing that computational functionalism is false, but rather that its falsity is to be taken seriously and is in the realm of serious possibility. I should say, by the way, I don't think this is right, that these articles don't get vetted by a journal. Basically, what people do is they publish these articles that have massive followings, and the authority of them is given by the fact that a whole lot of people sign on to them. And I think they should submit them to journals and get them reviewed. I don't think this, so anyway, it's a little diatribe. Okay, so note that the issue is whether meat mechanisms are necessary for consciousness, not whether they're sufficient. So coma patients have much of the meat machinery intact. So again, just to raise the same problem that always comes up, if we can identify what biological processing is doing, we can find a non-meat way of doing it, so meat is not required. So note that what biological processes are doing is ambiguous between a role and a realizer implementation, and that ignores the possibility that only analog realizers are conscious. So I raised this issue in a paper called The Harder Problem, which was focused on this figure of Commander Data, who is a fictional character whose mechanisms are not the same as ours, and the issue comes up about whether he's conscious. And the point I made is without a theory of what consciousness is, we cannot know whether it's the role or the realizer of that role that is the basis of consciousness. And that's the point I'm making now, which is that we have to distinguish between the role and the realizer, the implementer. And if the role is what counts, then all functionally similar beings are conscious. If the realizer is what counts, then creatures that share our physiology, I think all these mammals would be uncontroversial, but much of our biology is shared by fish, for example. And maybe even insects. So my point is that without a theory of what consciousness is, which we don't really seem very close to having, we just don't know whether it's the role or the realizer. And we're really only on firm ground when something like, for example, monkeys and the great apes have both the role and the realizer. So I'll just say a little more about these notions, of these function notions. So the issue of whether computational functionalism is true is not the same, contrary to a lot of mistakes you see. So this is just an important point to be clear about. It's not the same as the issue of whether consciousness has a function. So perhaps a function of consciousness is, for example, to motivate. People have speculated that, well, maybe the way consciousness evolved is via its utility in getting us to avoid things that damage our body and to seek things that aid reproduction and survival. Or maybe it's to promote cognitive access, the one I just mentioned before. But here's the rub, which is that it can have this function only because of an analog meat or meat-like implementation. So that's the possibility that has to be taken seriously. So the issue of whether consciousness has a function is not the same as computational functionalism, because it could have that function only because of a meat implementation. So here's another way to put the point, which is maybe a function of consciousness is to send these perceptual contents to thought, but maybe a non-conscious being, this is meant to be a picture of a zombie, could have the same function. So we can ask the question, does consciousness have a function? And I assume it does. This would be ridiculous. Why would evolution have provided us with consciousness? We don't understand it very well, but we understand it well enough to know it's an expensive thing. So I think we can be pretty sure that it has some functions. But then the question arises whether those functions are multiply implementable. If they are, and if only the meat implementation is conscious, then functionalism is false and meat is necessary. Meat might be necessary even if computational function, is true, if there's only one way to implement that function, and that's in meat. So just to be clear, we can distinguish between simulation and replicative implementation. The idea is that simulation duplicates the input-output of a process, and replicative implementation duplicates the input-output process plus intervening processing at some level of description. So this is the point about rainstorms. So I think, can be helped by looking at the notion of implementation of a computational mechanism. So it will be helpful to just think about the very simplest computational mechanism, namely a gate. So an AND gate is defined by the following input-output function. It has either 0, 1, or 1 inputs and a 0 or a 1 output. And the idea is that 2 1 inputs yield a 1 output, and all other combinations of inputs yield a 0 output. So that's the computational level. Two AND gates, importantly, that are computationally equivalent need not be the same in sub-computational properties. So here is an electrical AND gate where closing a switch is a one input. This is a battery, and this is a lamp. If the lamp is off, that's a zero output. If it's on, it's a one output. So two switches being closed, that's two one inputs, yields a one output, and all other inputs, combinations of open and closed, do not. Here is a mechanical AND gate. You can where pushing these things is a one, not leaving them extended is a zero, and both things being extended is a one output. And you can see that because of the way the thing is constructed, you can push one of them and it doesn't make the outside thing go. You need to push both of them to make the outside thing go. So the important point here is that there are two different kinds of machinery for subcomputational machinery, and it's the mechanism that counts, not what it's made of. So
Now it's
What
in the,
happened?
it stopped. I can't hear.
what?
We couldn't hear you for a few seconds. So if you
Oh,
could go back one slide, it would be good. Yeah.
oh, I'm sorry. Where did it stop?
Right after the two were AND gates, the two types of AND gates that you showed.
Oh,
After that,
okay.
they fell out.
So yeah, so my point is that although the topic of whether meat implementations are required, the claim that they might be required is an extremely weak claim, but it's sufficiently important, if true, that it's worth evaluating. So I'm happy to have questions at any time. Any questions so far?
There have been some questions in the chat, but maybe you could save them for later if you don't mind. It's up to you.
Okay, sure. Yeah,
uh,
I haven't got the chat up here.
uh,
Yeah, sure.
I could read one of them to you if you like, but otherwise you could.
Oh, here, I've got them right here.
Okay.
Okay. Ooh, people say they can't see it.
That was a little short period in the beginning. I don't know why, but something happened there. So, but it was only the first couple of slides, as I could.
Okay. Gee.
I'm sorry about that.
Okay.
What happened? Yeah.
Could I elaborate what I mean by computational?
Yeah, that's
okay. Yeah.
This is ridiculous.
What? Somebody said something is what?
It was one person called Lucas, I think, asked that question. But I don't know. Yeah, if you can elaborate on that, or if you have time, or do it later after the talk.
Yeah, so I don't really have much to say about what is meant by computational. I'm using the sense of computational that is common in functionalist theories, computational functionalist theories. I should say that the article I mentioned endorsing computational functionalism doesn't define computation either. I think so. I'm really parasitic on what people in AI and computational neuroscience mean by computation. Actually, we'll get to just something. Yeah, so this will come up in a minute as well. So probably the main ambiguity is whether analog computation counts. So I'll say a bit more about that in a minute. Okay, so these are the four most significant theories of consciousness. a biological theory, global workspace, various higher order theories, and integrated information theories. There are 200 theories of consciousness that have been mentioned in various articles, but these are the ones I think that have significant numbers of proponents on which there is, ongoing research. Now, all three of these are in one or another way computational functionalists. The one that's a little bit the group is the integrated information theory, and I have a little discussion of this in the paper on this. But anyway, I think clearly all of these are meat unfriendly in the sense that they do not require any particular realization. So this is most clear in the case of the global workspace theory. Bernard Barros put forward this thing that he called the global workspace theory, and Dehaene and Shenju revived it in what they call the global neuronal workspace theory, and they do mention a lot of neuronal stuff, but the basic ideas of it don't require anything neural, and the proponents of it have been very clear on the idea of artificial realizations of the global workspace. So, but just to briefly, this outer ring is the surfaces of the body or the machine. And then the idea is that the inputs to the outer ring activate processors, and those processors in the peripheral areas compete, and that competition can lead to ignition, with one or two of them stimulating a much larger neural coalition involving PFC. And the idea is that this activated coalition is the representations are immediately available to various cognitive mechanisms, decision making, thinking, reporting, and the like. So the architecture, the basic ideas are competition leads to ignition, and those are computationally defined. And importantly, feedback is just as important as feed forward in forming these neural coalitions. And most current AI have been feed forward, though some feedback is allowed in some versions. Still, broadcasting in the global workspace in the usual way it's understood does not require any particular realization. The higher order thought view is that what makes seeing the tomato conscious is that the perception is accompanied by a thought to the effect that I'm seeing a tomato. This is the sort of standard Lockean, Armstrong, Rosenthal, Carruthers version of this view. And depending on whether thoughts required meat, this is a meat unfriendly idea. But the most of the work in this area now is in a more stripped down version, in which this was put forward by Hakwon Lau, and Matthias Michel has done a lot on this, is that what makes seeing the tomato conscious is that the perception is accompanied by a kind of monitor. And actually this corresponds maybe better to the original Lockean idea. But they use the computer science idea of a pointer that in prefrontal cortex that points to activations in perceptual areas. The main thing is that a pointer does not require meat. In computer science, a pointer is simply an activation of a cell that has an address of another cell. So integrated information. So a system is conscious if and only if it is appropriately complex and integrated. And any system, whatever mechanisms it has, can be evaluated for phi, that's the quantity that is supposed to mathematically encode this idea. So now it's not computational in the sense that no active computations are required for someone to be conscious, but it is computational in the sense in which it is completely neutral on what things have the high phi, what mechanisms are complex and integrated. I should say that feed-forward systems have zero phi, so current large language models would have zero phi according to this. But the main thing is that they do not require meat, and so they allow non-biological implementations. The biological approach, which I favor, was perhaps pioneered by Hobbes, was famously advanced by the Australian philosopher J.J.C. Smart and the European expatriate Herbert Feigl in the 50s and 60s, and was notably adopted by Francis Crick and Christoph Koch. Christoph then later moved to the IIT theory. But their model was theoretical identifications like water is H2O, light is the electromagnetic radiation, heat is molecular kinetic energy. And then the idea was that you could have some kind of a theory like this involving the brain. And in more modern terminology, some biological features are necessary features of one sufficient condition for consciousness. So a whole brain provides a sufficient condition for consciousness if it's the brain of a conscious person. But then the idea is that there might be, for example, V5MT plus might be a necessary part of a sufficient condition for the experience of optic flow. And then the thought is that if biological features are a necessary part of a sufficient condition for us, we may want to hypothesize that it's a necessary condition for all consciousness. Of course, whether that's so depends on why it's a necessary part of our sufficient condition. So if meat is necessary, we might want to know why and what aspect of meat. So the why question is very difficult to answer, but here are some guesses that people have made. Peter Godfrey Smith has pushed large-scale oscillatory signals. In a recent paper and some other recent papers, Earl Miller has suggested waves across cortex as important. Some people have suggested electromagnetic field effects. Stuart Hameroff and Roger Penrose have touted microtubule quantum effects, which I don't take very seriously, but it is a guess that some people have made. Ions crossing membranes. I've talked about electrochemical processing. So here's a paper that just came out from Earl Miller's lab. And here's what he says about this. He says, this is rotating waves in the cortex. The rotating waves act like herders that steer the cortex back to the correct computational path. The brain is using these traveling waves to actually do computation, analog computation, where he's not clear what sense he means analog, but probably not the sense that I have in mind. Analog computation is way more energy efficient than digital in biology, and biology favors energy efficient solutions. It's a different and more natural way to think about computation. So, people are exploring the idea that Johan mentioned at the very beginning, that there are mechanisms that brain mechanisms that are important for mental functioning that do not lend themselves naturally to a treatment, a computational treatment, especially the kind of computation involved in current AI. Electrochemical processing, which, by the way, is probably required for brain rhythms, the brain rhythms that Earl Miller talks about. One guesses it's electrochemical processing. And so why take electrochemical? What is it and why take it seriously? Well, every strong candidate for being a phenomenally conscious being has electrochemical processing that are fundamental to its mentality. So maybe these are necessary features of a sufficient condition for consciousness. What does that come to, this electrochemical processing? Well, you have neurotransmitters that flow between the axon of one cell, dendrites of another. Then you start an electrical flow in the receiving neuron. The electrosignal flows down, and neurotransmitters are released again. So it's a chemical process leading to an electrical process, leading to a chemical process, and starting all over again. So this is a kind of dramatic thing. And, I've been musing about this for years, but I'm going to say why I'm taking it more seriously now in a minute. So note that the argument is not that all known cases of consciousness have properties, so it's a plausible candidate for a necessary condition. Being made out of carbon would be a poor candidate because we know that mere composition need not be fundamental. You could have electrochemical processing with, different ions, not the ones that we use. Being alive may not be fundamental. There are living things that are not plausible candidates for consciousness. But again, the objection, electrochemical processing is computational too, but I hope by now I don't have to say again that electrochemical processing can be modeled computationally, but that may not be a replicative implementation. Many non-conscious things lack electrochemical processing, but also some non-conscious things have electrochemical processing. So I'm postulating that it is necessary, not sufficient. So as I say, I've been musing about this for years. And the reason that I'm taking it more seriously now is because of some recent developments in the evolution of complex life. And I'll just say a little bit about this. How am I doing for time, Johan?
You are doing fine. There are about 10 more, 15 more minutes.
Okay, well, I'll try to finish in. I'll,
16.
I'll try to finish in 10. Okay,
Yeah,
so, oops. Here is the family tree of metazoa. We're metazoans. Metazoa are complex animals that have differentiated parts that do different things. So it was assumed by many people that sponges were the first metazoans. So this is the metazoa family tree, which the simplest members are sponges. Then the step up is comb jellies, and then corals and true jellyfish, and then lots of other things, including us. So here are the two candidates, though, for first animal, comb jellies and sponges. And there was a disagreement about which came first. So importantly, comb jellies have neurons, muscles, and a gut. And sponges don't have any of those properties. And so there were two theories. I think more people thought sponges were the first animal, but there was some question about whether comb jellies were descended from sponges or comb jellies were the first animal and maybe sponges were descended from them. And these were called the comb jelly sister hypothesis and the sponge sister hypothesis. Notice that comb jellies
Now it stopped again, the sound, for some reason.
possible positions of comb jellies, known as ctenophores, by the way. The idea is like the ctenophores, could be first. The ctenophores could be after sponges. This is called the comb jelly sister hypothesis, sponge sister. And the reason for the word sister is that sister groups are the most closely related groups sharing a common ancestor from which they diverged at roughly the same time. That's what the word sister means. Okay, so the first of the two results that I mentioned that I'm going to talk about is this. This is a paper in Nature in 2023. And as news articles said, that ancient gene linkages, actually chromosomal linkages, support ctenophores as the first animal, sister to all other animals. So here's the article: ancient gene linkages support ctenophores as sister to other animals. And what this said was, I'm not sure how to pronounce this word, synteny. It's chromosome scale linkage. And what they showed is that bilaterians, cynarians, and placozoans all are part of a group together to the exclusion of ctenophores. Ctenophores are an earlier group that the chromosomal patterns show to be fundamentally different from us. We are a result of a rare and irreversible chromosome fusion and mixing events that provide robust and unambiguous phylogenetic support for the ctenophore sister. The idea is that there are irreversible chromosomal changes between ctenophores and us. So we are part of the same family as sponges, and ctenophores are are not in that family. So here we are bilateria. I'm not sure how to pronounce any of these words, but we're together with sponges as being in a different biological category from ctenophores. And this article coins the term myriazoa for us. So myriazoa are animals excluding ctenophores. We are myriazoans. So that's the idea. So it looks like sponges lost their nerve.
Now the sound was gone again for a while.
Lost.
Looks like
neurons, and they were lost.
Yeah, just your sound lost for a few seconds. So it seems that sponges lost their. You said, and then I was just
So it looks like sponges lost their neurons because there's an earlier creature, the ctenophores, that looks like it's related to sponges, but the ctenophores had neurons and the sponges didn't. Good. Okay, so is that audible?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, hear it now.
Yeah, I don't know what's mad. I think I'm suspecting it's my my connection here, but I'm sorry about that. But do let me know.
Yeah, I'll tell you.
So if sponges lost their neurons, the question is why, and why aren't we? What is it that's different about ctenophore neurons that makes them in this different group? So these two articles came out at once. This is what stimulated me to write this article, because it just calls out for thinking about what this could possibly mean. So here is the other article. This is really cool. So at the same time as these evolutionary biologists were realizing that ctenophores were the first animal, some other biologists were looking at the nervous system of ctenophores, and they published this article about the ctenophore neurons. And what it said was that ctenophores may have a purely electrical nervous system that doesn't involve chemical neurotransmitters. And the news articles about this said, comb jellies have a bizarre nervous system unlike any other animal. And what is that nervous system? Here it is. Oops. So it's just a mind blower to look at this nervous system and see it is a neural network. It doesn't have those those gaps across which chemicals flow. And I should say, by the way, one item of caution is that this is the neural network of one stage of the ctenophore, and the ctenophores have various different stages, and this is the only one that is relatively easy to study. So we don't know for sure that all the other stages are like this. So this is a striking fact. Something about those neurons didn't make it evolutionarily. So we now see that this is the right diagram. The ctenophores comb jellies were first. And the reason that they didn't take off in an evolutionary way is that something about the purely electrical nervous system didn't work as well. So neither the purely chemical form of bodily control in one-celled animals nor the purely electrical form led to complex organisms, suggesting there was something wonderful about the electrochemical properties of neurons. And what is that? Well, here are some hypotheses. Gosh, I think I'm running out of time here, right?
No, it's fine. You have still 6 minutes or so. Yeah.
Okay, I'll finish in 6 minutes. Okay, so what is wonderful? Well, it might be inhibition. It might be learning. It might be some form of proto-consciousness. So let's just look at inhibition. Inhibition is important to attention and indirectly to consciousness. But here's the rub. Electrical synapses can inhibit, and inhibition can be done fairly efficiently. This is all discussed. It's a wonderful history book. I won't dwell on it, but I'll just get to the main point, which is that inhibition can be done efficiently. And this was discovered by Eccles, who also discovered the electrochemical mechanisms. So skipping right ahead, what about learning? Well, the next step up the phylogenetic scale are cnidaria, which includes true jellyfish. And it looks like they're pretty unimpressive, at least the ones that came first. They can do certain kinds of learning, but really nothing that I won't go into this. And, the odd thing is that the cnidarians who came after the ctenophores, the true jellyfish, seem in a way less complex than the ctenophores. The ctenophores are actually pretty complex. They have more specialized tissues. The early cnidarians, the next step up, didn't swim around at all. They were attached like in coral. And the ctenophores actually had a more refined sensory system, so it's it does seem like it was pretty that the ctenophores were actually pretty complex animals. What about proto-consciousness? Well, one possibility is some kind of proto-consciousness, and then that raises the weird issue of what good is proto-consciousness. Another possibility, which may be more likely, is that in these initial animals, electrical systems are equally good, but by chance one leads to conscious creatures and the other doesn't. Or maybe there is some other advantage of electrochemical processing that explains the success of electrochemical creatures. So, is meat required for consciousness? I think resounding maybe.